Our time is really tight, and we'd like to have discussion at the end. So we're going to get started on time, and we're going to try and talk really fast. So my name is Maggie Farrell. I'm the Dean of Libraries at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And Barb and Rick will introduce themselves a little bit later in the presentation. So since we know that our time is really tight and we want to keep this somewhat casual, we want to alert you that we did a podcast before the Charleston conference, so if you'd like to listen to
y'all can go.
In fact, we were just going to play the podcast today and just speed it up.
We have cocktails coming too.
But we are also going to edit a special issue of Against the Grain. So if you are interested in this topic and would like to write something about working with vendors and how you've been successful in transforming a commercial relationship into a partnership, let me know, and we would be happy to have your submission. So with that, let's get started. So first, what I want to know is how many in the room believe that vendors are inherently evil, money grubbers? No. All right. And the vendors are all raising their hands.
We're not talking about the other vendors.
Okay. So now we're going to have the vendors just kind of duke it out. But a commercial relationship can be just that. And this afternoon we want to talk about how to transform that commercial relationship into more of a partnership where you're both pulling for the same goals and how to work effectively together. So today we'll cover why you should partner with a vendor, what types of partnerships are useful, how you can make a partnership work, and then when should you end a partnership. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barb.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm Barbara Kavensky. I'm the Director of Customer Retention for Gobi Library Solutions from EBSCO for the Western U.S. My background is I've been an academic librarian, I've been a law librarian, I've also been on the dark side for a very long time. Our industry is really one where we depend on each other for success. And it's really this mutual dependency that provides a great opportunity for both libraries and vendors to partner together to design products and services that are going to enrich our markets. So for vendors to provide the most valuable products and services to libraries, they really have to have a thorough understanding of the issues and the workflows and the initiatives that are going on in libraries. While I think direct communication is critical, I also think it's very important that vendors employ people who have been on the front lines in libraries. So whether that be at the reference desk, doing collection development, doing acquisitions, systems, having experienced librarians on staff really allows us to have valuable insight into the market and that we're trying to serve. So between our parent organization and Gobi Library Solutions, we employ about 225 librarians. And I think, Rick, you could probably have a similar number. I think that's a really important piece of having a successful partnership. So why would partnering with a vendor make sense for a library? I think really one of the chief reasons is economies of scale. Vendors can develop software, products, and services cheaper and more efficiently than a library can do this on their own. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the ILS sector, where almost no one, when I started as a baby librarian, there were lots of particularly large ARL libraries that had their own homegrown ILS systems. Those don't exist anymore, and I think Rick can talk about that. And while you might be an expert on your library, vendors have a much broader view of what's going on in trends, workflows, solutions. I always tell folks that I can walk into a library that is similar size, same ILS, same budget, same number of staff, and I guarantee you they will do things completely different than the library down the street. So I think really in the normal course of the year, I visit large and small academic libraries in about 19 states. And I think that what that gives vendors is really kind of a 35,000-foot view of what's going on in the industry. And it really allows us to help libraries in terms of suggesting solutions, working on problems together. We are really aware of what's happening with library budgets, new directions. So vendors can be a great source of information on what might be happening in terms of jobs throughout the industry, consortial activities, projects that are going on, maybe across states. And really vendors might be able to put you in touch or network you into exactly someone that you need to be talking to about a solution to a problem that you have or a project that you're trying to work on. So let's talk about some of the elements of effective partnerships. Sometimes a library approaches us about a particular project or a problem, and sometimes we approach them because we've been in there talking to folks and we kind of know what directions our libraries are taking. So at the end of the day, really what we need, what a partnership needs is really shared vision and common goals. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand, it's important for librarians to understand what motivates a vendor. A vendor is always going to be, for the most part, this isn't true of all of our vendors in the industry, but a for-profit entity, and it's important to keep that in mind. We might be developing a product and need confirmation that we're moving in the right direction. So we might ask libraries to be part of a focus group. One of my colleagues talks about we have pop-up focus groups, so we might be bringing some folks in to look at a particular sector of a product or service. I think longer term, many vendors also use advisory boards to really shape the direction of the products and services that they're creating. And these tend to be much longer term commitments on the part of the library, since the boards are privy to a lot of information about direction of the company and development. Lots of times you might, if you're serving on one of those boards, you might be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA. But partnering with a vendor is really an opportunity to be on the cutting edge of what's coming out in terms of products and services. And in some cases, libraries approach us to develop a solution for their particular problem, and then we can bring that out to the wider market. So it's a great opportunity. Sorry, my notes are a little bit limp from the humidity. So Rick is going to talk about some of the different types of partnerships.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Rick Branham, and I'm Cersei Dynix's Vice President of Pre-Sales Solutions and Academic Library Initiatives. And I've been in the industry a really long time and have worked with all various types of libraries in many different capacities. And I can draw on some of that experience as we walk through different types of partnerships. And I've been involved in just about every type of partnership with a library. So the first type of partnership that we often encounter are informational partnerships, and these are most often in forms of libraries that are perhaps doing either formal or informal surveys of the market in the form of an RFI or an RFQ, or simply just conversations with vendors at conferences and other venues. And they're trying to assess vendor capabilities and kind of get a handle on functionality that's available. And also, libraries are often looking for what's on the upcoming roadmap. So what are vendors planning on developing? And in these assessments, libraries often want to talk to existing customers and kind of find out what customers are doing around a certain functional area. And this will help the library determine what their next steps are. Do they want to go through formal procurement or wait a while? I mean, I think you've probably all been through similar exercises. Another type of partnership is a little more involved, and I'd call that a consultative partnership. And these often involve vendor demonstrations, discussions. They may utilize either development or product management staff, so some deep dive on functionality. In my experience, the consultative assessment is usually prior to any kind of joint development or anything like that. So you're just getting a feel for what's possible. And that may move through to a formal beta testing routine. And at least with my company, that often involves a non-disclosure agreement. So you've got some protection of IP as you do this kind of deep dive assessment of functionality. At Cersei Dynix, we actually employ consultative assessments and partnerships on a regular basis. We use what's called a strategic partner program, where we engage customers from the various early stages of development planning all the way through beta testing and piloting and then release. And at any given time, we've got 15 or 16 different strategic partner programs running. Sometimes we do a one-off consultative partnership. One recent example that comes to mind was the Lewis Consortium in Louisiana. It's an academic library consortium statewide. And they worked with us on a kind of a one-off testing of using our enterprise discovery interface as the primary front end that EDS plugs into. And we did some setup and beta testing and even some pretty detailed implementation around this pilot project for them. So the next type of development would be collaborative. And what I'm referring to here mostly is a joint agreement for co-development of a project. So the library's gone through the various stages of assessment and decided that there's nothing really viable in the market and they want to co-develop a product with us. A recent example was the state of South Australia, who worked with Cersei Dynix to develop our next-gen acquisitions called Blue Cloud acquisitions. So it was quite an involved project that we worked with them for about a year actually to develop detailed functional specifications. We developed a timeline. That's very important. You don't want to leave these projects open-ended. In fact, you can't get a good handle on the cost unless you have laid out specifically what the functions are involved and how long this is going to take. And then we also employ various modern tools to help us with that collaboration. You can imagine with our development headquarters being in Salt Lake City and South Australia being on the other side of the world, quite literally, that it posed some challenges in terms of regular collaboration, but modern tools really help us with that. So I've narrowed these down to 3 types of tools: prototyping software, but also conferencing software and file sharing. So I'll speak mostly to my experience with these, but I've done a little bit of homework and given some links here on the best type or the top leading products in this industry. So we use InVision for our prototyping, but Mock Plus is another good package, and Adobe's new XD suite has gotten a lot of good reviews. I'll just give you an example of InVision. This is another co-development project we did with a few universities in the UK, and this is on our new Blue Cloud list, which is a course management product. And so you can see that the prototyping software literally captures every single function, every element laid out on the screen exactly as it will be developed. And it gives our development partners a chance to assess every click and how everything's laid out on the screen prior to any coding taking place. So again, it's quite detailed, and we're able to map out, using our user experience engineers, every single element. So this is defining a list and defining what the list is called, and then searching various targets for items to add to a list and modifying the list section. So again, this is used really heavily in our code development process. It gives us really valuable feedback. You're not wasting time actually coding a product and then going back and changing it. It's something we can do using this prototype software and it just really makes our development time more efficient. Some other tools are conferencing software packages, and I'm sure many of you have used WebEx, JoinMe, GoToMeeting. We most commonly use WebEx for smaller interactions, and GoToMeeting for larger webinars where we got more people involved. JoinMe is also a really cheap option. They have a free version that works great and is super easy to get going fast. File sharing software like Dropbox, Google Docs, Basecamp, we use all of these very extensively. And in planning for our various presentations, podcasts, magazine articles, we use Google Docs and quite effectively are able to, in real time, collaborate on writing a document. And even during our podcast, we had chat windows open so we could follow our outline along and make snarky comments to each other as we were speaking. Made it a lot of fun, right?
Very professional.
You are the main
There was
star.
a lot of editing done on the podcast.
That's right. So Barbara's going to talk a little bit about how to make the partnership work more effectively. So to illustrate this true partnership, we're handing off the roles. Thank you.
Probably all going to drink out of the same water glass.
We have to.
All right, so I think as with any arrangement, it's library vendor partnerships really benefit from documentation. So from having things in writing. One of the things that we do at Gobi Library Solutions, one of our claims to fame, so to speak, are approval plans. And we really document this process through something called a memorandum of agreement. And what that really does is it identifies all of the building blocks, all of the pieces, all of the different areas that we're going to cover in an approval plan. So documentation is really important. It really helps you kind of clarify expectations, particularly if you're working on projects. One of the projects that we're working on right now is an opening day collection with library in Texas, Austin Community College. And we've done a couple of these before, but this has a little bit of a different spin. They recently changed ILS systems in the middle of a big project. So, Cersei Dynex, thank you. But it really helps to have a project document so that you can kind of clarify all the expectations, the time frames, the development time frame, what the expectations are in terms of when we're going to start placing orders, when we're going to start filling those orders, what we're going to do with those books when we fill those orders, because there isn't any place to send them yet. It's in the process of being built. So, and to be able to share all of that with our partners and with the rest of the project team is really important. And then at the same time, going back to our approval plans, it's really important to be able to have a document that you can review together periodically and revise as our libraries develop new courses, new programs, personnel changes, interest changes, curriculum changes. We want to be able to get together, review all of that, and make revisions where necessary. And Rick's going to talk about where you find your partners, besides the bar.
That's the best place to find them. And to get them to sign agreements.
Right, in the bar.
Yes. So, first of all, libraries often have a defined need and will come looking for a partner. So it's probably the most common way this happens. And vendors have to be open enough and talking about their plans and direction and vision, so that it's easy for libraries to assess what vendors are doing and to find common ground for common solutions. We talked a little earlier about some of the collaboration tools that make it possible to move beyond a local area. You don't have to have face-to-face meetings anymore like we used to in the past, so you can use these collaborative tools to partner with organizations on different hemispheres, which is what we've done recently. And sometimes the library finds you, sometimes you find them. The South Australian deal that I referred to actually started with me having a discussion in a very informal setting with the state library director, and he was just casually talking about a future project and needing to develop a bespoke acquisition system. And I said, hey, why don't we talk about that? So that's how the whole thing got started. So Maggie is going to talk, once the need has been established and you've decided to partner in some form, then what happens? So how do you make this work?
Care and feeding. Well, it's appropriate that we're in Charleston talking about caring and feeding of a relationship. So we've been talking a lot about partnerships, and you've noticed that those partnerships can occur regardless of geography. So you're looking for similar motivations, similar goals to work with each other. And partnerships, we'll talk a little bit about how they ebb and flow. But right now we want to talk about how you nurture a partnership. So first it's about finding the right people. So on a project you want to make sure both on the vendor side as well as the library side that you have individuals who are engaged and willing to work with the vendor. So those individuals need to bring the right attitude and a skill set that keeps them open to a relationship. You want that right mix of people and attitudes as you work on a partnership. You also notice we've talked a lot about communication. How do you work together using the various tools? How do you articulate what that partnership is about? So a partnership is ultimately a relationship that depends on strong communication. Actually, I've gone one to Barb, sorry. So on communication, you want that frequent communication, honest, direct communication. And you want to make sure that throughout the relationship that you're working well with each other, you're being direct, and that you're nurturing that relationship. And Barb, talk about quid pro quo.
I will, but I want to also give a plug to some colleagues in the front row. So this morning I went to a session that Mike Thompson and Carol Seiler did on a similar topic, but they really focused on some practical communication techniques. And so again, as you're developing this partnership, it's important to, well, we have all kinds of great tools today. I really do think that sometimes there is no substitution for just a face-to-face, sit down over coffee, have lunch, a meeting to really hash some things out. And I think we ought to combine programs. But I'm going to talk next about quid pro quo. And so sometimes when you're involved in a partnership with a vendor, part of that you may be receiving some type of special discount or special pricing for the product as your development partner. You might also be asked to talk at conferences or talk to your colleagues about the product and the development process. So it's really important to understand that might be part of the deal. And then resolving problems, I think this goes back again to Carol and Mike's presentation this morning. What's the best way to resolve those problems and to be able to communicate, the who, what, when, where, and why of something that might be going wrong. So it's really important someone talked in that session talked about the fact that they have like a communication template for when something is going wrong with one of their resources. And she basically said, I'm the person that has to troubleshoot this, and this is all of the information I need in order to be able to communicate effectively with our vendors. So sometimes a partnership ends. I would sing to you, but that would be really horrible. Breaking up is hard to do. Sometimes a partnership ends naturally. So for example, in Rick's example, he was talking about a development process that finally came to a normal ending conclusion. So, why do partnerships end? Sometimes there are so many issues for whatever reason, or the right people are not involved, and at the end of the day, the decision is made that the partnership needs to end. I think we all know this, we are in a very, very small industry. I've been on the vendor side for a long time, and I used to tell young sales reps that when we go to conferences, you need to be nice to that person in the next booth, because next year they might be in your booth and they might be your boss. So don't burn any bridges. We all move around both on the vendor side, on the library side. So it's important to do do everything with real style and grace and professionalism and consideration that, you know, we're all just people trying to get through the day and make a living, and at the end of the day make some good products and services for our industry. It's also important to document the conclusion of a partnership. So, for example, if things don't go right, sometimes there are legal reasons to do that, and I think Maggie can talk about a couple of examples there, but you might need to move resources from off of a platform to another repository or something like that. So it's important, because we all do change jobs every now and again, that you document that information so that your institution and the organization has that information. And Megan, you were going to talk about a couple of examples from libraries.
Exactly. So, and we'd like to hear from you. We've left some time at the end to field some questions and to have this be a little bit more interactive than just talking about you. So an example, we're all in collaborative relationships with other libraries, with other government agencies, museums, and vendors. So an example that I had is that we were in a collaborative relationship that involved a vendor, several libraries. Financially, at the end, it just didn't make sense. And so finally, we had to end that partnership. But in order to end the partnership, we needed to document how to pull money apart, how to move data, how to basically make everyone whole after that partnership fell apart. And it fell apart for a variety of reasons, but I think the important aspect of that partnership falling apart was that we, do I dare say it, we were still friends. It's me, not you kind of thing. So, in front of that, it's just so pretty. It's just so pretty. We just have to have it fly away. But I think understanding why a partnership ended, either on good or maybe on negative terms, is important for, it's also for the legacy of an organization. And I can say, working with Barb and Rick, so I've known Barb and Rick probably now 20 years, and our relationship in terms of a commercial relationship has ebbed and flowed. And Barb has seen me go to different universities. I've seen her go to different companies. And it is a very, very
Rick
small
stays.
world. Rick stays.
We all just revolve around.
He's a rock.
I'm like cockroaches at the end.
So one of the reasons we all come to Charleston is really about working together. Although we would say it's a lot about the food.
Definitely
The food.
The grits.
The grits, exactly. But it's a unique opportunity for us to work closely with vendors and to have conversations that might be difficult in other settings. So ultimately, we all have the same goals of advancing our libraries, our users, and our communities. So we'd like to hear from you, any questions or observations that you might have. We have about 9 minutes remaining, and we'd like to hear from you about your success, or if you have a specific question, we'd be happy to try to address it with our limited expertise. So,
I mean, I guess, why did you come to this room today in the Embassy Suites?
Because we like Maggie.
I love you too.
We do
She
too.
told me to say that. It's a different kind of partnership now.
That's right.
Exactly.
She paid me.
I have a question.
Sure.
So my question would be, if you're working on a project and you have two vendors that are involved in the project along with the library, which I've had, and it ended up being successful, but at times it wasn't, and still sometimes isn't. So, how do you get the two of them to speak more, because that's where the communication problems
That's a
Word.
good
That's a
question.
really good question.
Yeah, because the issue is, I'm not gonna go into specifics right now, but there is a product that we now use that one vendor has been really great, they've been on top of things all the time, but the other one is never letting that other vendor know when there might be a problem with this, it's the ILS people. And they never let the other one know that, oh, we're doing an upgrade and this might be affected, so then they don't know, and then, yeah, and it's like trying to get them to sort of speak to one another is sort of difficult.
I mean, I think that's a good example of, kind of taking it to a higher level. Mag's talked a little bit about having the right people, and I think it also is important to understand when you need to bump that up a level or 2 or 3, because in that scenario, I mean, you really do need to, we all have people who are in charge of our partner relationships, and so we might need to get that person involved, or maybe it's our director of technical services that we, you gotta call up CLC and see what's going on there or something. I mean, I can think of a couple of different scenarios, and I know as a vendor it's challenging when we can't control the entire process. When we were
Yeah.
just a print book vendor and the books came in and we did everything, that was one thing, and then we got into these partner relationships with ebook aggregators and publisher partners, and when we can't control all the pieces, we really do sometimes need to have those conversations at a higher level.
Yeah,
So-
that's when it seemed to get sort of hard to manage, because we weren't the managers, it was really the 2 vendors that were. But one was very much involved in trying to control the project, and the other one was sort of peripheral and not letting anybody know anything. So once the beta testing was over for the product and we had it in line, it's like, then we get upgraded on the system and we didn't know what was going on and everything would fall apart and we're like, what's happening,
We didn't talk at length about communication because of time, but communicating throughout the process. And Barb mentioned making sure that you have the right person, the right people, and making sure you have the right people talking to the right people. So I've had situations where as a dean of library, somebody will say to me, well, you need to get involved in this. And I'm like, no, it's not at the right level. Or I've had the opposite, a problem keeps growing and growing, and then I'm like, I should have been involved at this level in order to resolve it. So I think understanding sort of that right mix and making sure that you're staying on top of that communication and that you're trying to solve it. But I think it goes back to what Rick was talking about and Barb was talking about in terms of documenting the agreement and timeline so that you can go back and say, here's your timeline, and you're not sticking with that timeline. Helps.
Yeah.
But I think you have some specific examples.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in something very similar in that we were working with a library and there was another vendor involved. And if I had, perfect hindsight vision, I would have gone back and made sure everything was documented and agreed upon before we started the project. Because we just assumed that we were all committed to making this work. And yeah, after the first deliverable, the other vendor kind of dropped off and said, we don't have time for this. And what it took was taking it up to the right person who said, look, you realize this is impacting our mutual customer greatly, so we have to come together to make this work. And so they reassigned some other staff person who was more committed. And so the project's back on track. So sometimes it takes taking it up a few notches, having those people agree to work together, and then assigning the right staff. But, in the beginning, you got to get everything documented and everybody agreed, and not just rely on people's verbal, intentions. I think there's a question back here.
So that question is comment, just following up on what Maggie said. As a middle manager, you and perhaps your immediate supervisor, whether it's a division head or the director or dean of libraries, you'll all be in agreement with the vendor for development, partnership, etc. But it's really important for, I would say, senior management to make sure your peers, other department heads, other librarians are on board. I've been in a situation where everything was hunky-dory, but I learned during my mid-tenure review that there's a lot of hostility whether it was towards well, it was a combination of towards that particular vendor, plus the idea of the library partnering with a vendor, period. And I was aware of it, you know, the management was aware of it, but the feelings festered for years, even though it turned out to be extremely successful. And I think, you know, brought a lot of attention to our library, which, you know, that's why the dean was, you know, pretty gung-ho about it.
So that internal communication is just as important. Well, and when I was at Wyoming, we were working with a vendor on a possible project, and a previous project went wrong. But because we knew why that particular project went wrong, when we were talking to the vendor about purchasing pretty expensive software, I said, you know, within our organization, there's a lot of skepticism about this. So I need some assurance from you. And what they did is they assigned a vice president to oversee our account to make sure that everything went well. So back to that, understanding why a partnership or a project failed in the past and bringing that forward to prevent it, and then communicating within the organization. It turned out to be a very, very smooth process, software implemented very well, almost seamlessly, and I think it's because we had that communication up front, and folks within the library who were skeptical knew why we were working with this particular vendor. What other issues or examples do you have?
So when looking at vendors that are partnering with one another, as a library, how do you approach that subject of what assurances do we have in a way that doesn't sour the whole deal? What I'm saying is, there's got to be a balance between being super pushy as, what are you going to do for me? And the other side of it's like, well, I don't want to be left out in the cold after we spent all this time on our side. So how do you reach that balance of getting that agreement but not selling it from the beginning by pushing it?
Well, and I think it does go back to understanding the motivation. So I know at the end of the day, when I'm working with Barb, that she has a financial motive. And I understand that. But then I also understand where our budget is. and there are times, and we have become good friends based on a professional relationship. And there are times when we sit down and I will say, all right, I am not your friend here.
To put my dean hat on.
Exactly. And I need to talk to you from my university perspective. But I think it goes back to that communication being upfront. So I appreciate it when a vendor says, you know, we can do this, but we can't do that. So I want honesty from a vendor. So nurturing that relationship. One thing we didn't talk about is how more so about that communication. So I look for opportunities where I can engage a vendor in a different way than on the sales floor. So how can I build that relationship? Do I know who the CEO is? Do I know what their motivation, their vision? Because ultimately, I want to work with those companies that have the same vision that we do for our libraries. And I know that's not always possible because we work with so many vendors, but I think some really deep partnerships happen when you're both pulling for the same thing. And I know there's financial on one end, and there's saving money on the other end, but at the same time, we're pulling. I think it does come down to that communication and the documenting about those expectations. And Rick, you probably have some examples of how to work to make sure that you are moving forward.
Yeah, so this particular project in South Australia, they fortunately, are we okay for just a minute?
We're okay for a minute.
Just real quick, it was one of the best examples of change management that I've ever experienced. They had a change management coordinator involved, and she ensured that everything was documented and that there was regular communication and that there was a constant assessment of where we were and that everybody was committed on each side. I mean, this was an ongoing iterative process of making sure we were all on the same page. And at first it seemed kind of excessive that she was ensuring that we took all these steps, but boy, when it was over, we realized the value of it because we were all on the same page and there was just absolutely not a point where we felt like one side was being screwed. You know, so I'm all for it now, and I think every project should have some level of that type of obsessive change management approach. It was pretty obsessive, but it was important.
I know we're out of time, but there's one last quick, do you want to ask it?
Well, I just wanted to comment on something you said about, let's say, dissension within the ranks or not agreement within the ranks. And I think it's very important that the lead person, whether it's the dean or the or something, some person takes the heat, does the communication with all the stakeholders, even people who are not the stakeholders within the organization, because the hardest thing is to be working on a project where people around you are holding you back because they don't agree with it.
Yeah.
And it's really leader leads, and I've seen that for years, that really what makes the difference on a lot of these projects. And it comes, again, to communication, but also leadership.
Sounds good. We couldn't end on a better note. Thank you very much for coming. We hope you have a good